My name is Caroline Whittaker, and I'm 62 years old. When I stepped off the airport shuttle that January afternoon, the Vermont wind cut through my wool coat like it had been waiting for me. 6 weeks away had felt like a lifetime. I'd been in southern Arizona on a Habitat for Humanity build, hauling lumber in the desert sun, imagining I'd come home to the calm of my father's small cedar, shingled house, his half-smile at the door, and the smell of coffee drifting from his kitchen. Instead, I was standing on his porch, suitcase in hand, knocking on a door that stayed stubbornly shut. The porch light was off, curtains drawn. The snow-covered swing swayed slightly in the wind. "Dad," I called. Nothing. Only the faint crunch of boots on icy pavement behind me. I turned to see Linda Parks, Dad's neighbor for decades, pushing her little terrier in a stroller lined with knitted blankets. She stopped short when she saw me. "Caroline, I thought you were still down south," she said, brows knitting. "Came home early. Thought I'd surprise him." Her lips pressed into a line. "They're not here. Emily. Sarah and Trevor left for Bali 3, maybe 4 days ago. Whole family trip." She hesitated. "Your father's in the hospital. Ambulance took him 2 weeks ago. Heart trouble. The cold didn't just bite this time. It sank into my lungs." 2 weeks, I asked. She nodded. "County Memorial." By the time she turned to leave, my pulse was pounding in my ears. My daughters, Emily and Sarah's husband, Trevor, were sipping cocktails on the other side of the world. My father, Daniel Whittaker, was in a hospital bed, and no one had thought I needed to know. The cab ride to County Memorial blurred past in frost, edged windows and unwanted memories. Every call I'd gotten in Arizona had been about kitchen remodels, yoga retreats, or Trevor's new Tesla. Not one word about Dad's failing heart. The automatic doors whooshed open, letting me into the sharp antiseptic air of the hospital. My boots squeaked on the linoleum as I reached the ICU desk. "Can I help you?" the nurse asked. "I'm Caroline Whittaker. My father, Daniel Whittaker, was admitted here. Heart trouble." She scanned her monitor. "Room 312. You'll need to sanitize and gown up. You're the first visitor he's had in a while. First visitor." The words landed heavier than the January wind. I slipped into the pale yellow gown and stepped into Dad's room. He was propped up slightly, the blanket pulled to his chest, his skin almost translucent under the fluorescent light. A nasal cannula fed him oxygen. The steady beep of the monitor was the only sound until his eyes fluttered open. "Caroline," he whispered. "Hey, Dad." I took his hand. It felt cool, the skin thinner than I remembered. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" He looked away. "Didn't want to ruin your trip. I didn't think they'd just leave." "They're in Bali," I said flatly. A shadow crossed his face. "I know. We talked quietly about doctors and medications, but underneath it all, my mind kept circling the same thought. My daughters had walked away from this man without a second thought. When a nurse came in to check his vitals, I stepped aside. My phone buzzed. A group chat notification from Emily. Beach photos, cocktail emojis. Trevor laughing in a thatched roof bar. Not one mention of Dad. Not one mention of me. "You okay?" the nurse asked. "Not really," I said. "But I will be." I sat again and opened his bedside drawer for tissues. Instead, I found a neat envelope with my name in his handwriting. Inside was a durable power of attorney, naming me sole agent for his medical and financial decisions. This wasn't oversight. This was intent. He had chosen me. And now I had to decide what to do with that trust. I came back the next morning before sunrise. The ICU was quiet except for the hum of machines and the soft squeak of a janitor's cart. While Dad slept, I flipped through his patient chart, wanting to understand his treatment. Then I saw it. Notes from a family meeting I hadn't been told about. The signatures: Emily Whittaker, Sarah Whittaker, Trevor Barnes. Know me. They were here the day after he was admitted. Beth, the day nurse, said when she noticed my expression. "Told us you were still out of state. Signed off on moving him to a private room, more comfortable for visitors. It's more expensive, right? Insurance barely covers it," she admitted. "Honestly, it's not for him, it's for them." The words sat cold in my stomach. I called the billing department. Thousands of dollars in surcharges were being billed directly to Dad, not covered by insurance. Another Bali photo popped up on my phone. This time, Trevor held a cocktail shaped like a pineapple. Living the dream. By the time I walked back into Dad's room, my decision was made. "Dad," I said, taking his hand, "I'm going to take care of you. But you need to trust me. Things might get complicated. He squeezed my fingers, faint but firm. Caroline, you've always been the one I trust. Do what you have to. And that was all the permission I needed. That afternoon, I stopped by Dad's house. The faint smell of pipe tobacco still lingered. At his desk, everything was neatly arranged, except for one open folder of bank statements. The balances were far lower than I expected. Large cash withdrawals, just under reporting limits, every few weeks. Some dated the same week he was hospitalized. The signatures weren't quite his. And at the bottom of the stack was an authorization form from 3 months ago, adding Emily to his account. The signature line for Dad was shaky, uneven. Forced, I photographed everything, my hands trembling. At the hospital, I asked gently, "Do you remember adding Emily to your account?" He frowned. She said the bank needed my signature for something with my insurance card. I was tired. I didn't read it. "Dad, I think she's been taking your money." His eyes clouded, not with surprise, but resignation. "I'm sorry." I didn't want to believe it. That night, I sat across from Nora Feldman, my father's attorney. She confirmed my fear. Financial exploitation, possibly forgery. We could revoke Emily's access, freeze the account, and start an investigation. But we'd need proof. "Get them talking," Nora said, in their own words. The next morning, I went to the bank with Nora's letter. Steve, the branch manager, flagged the account and agreed to call me about any suspicious activity. Emily's access would be suspended within days. That afternoon, I bought a small clip, on audio recorder. That evening, I texted Emily and Sarah meet me at Dad's house. Update on his care. They agreed. When they arrived, I served tea and cookies, keeping my voice light, letting them recount Bali's stories. Then I leaned forward. "About Dad's finances, I've noticed some changes." Emily shrugged. "It's practical. You're always away. Someone had to decide." Sarah chimed in. "Yeah, we're keeping things running." "Even if that means moving thousands out of his account?" I asked. "It's for expenses," Emily said. "We can't keep using our own savings for his comfort. And anyway, once he's gone, it all comes to us eventually." I kept my face neutral, the recorder in my sweater pocket capturing every word. By the time they left, I had everything I needed. The next day, Steve called. The account was officially frozen, Emily's access revoked. The balance was lighter than it should have been, but it was safe. But I wasn't done. I set a meeting at the hospital with the ICU coordinator. Emily and Sarah came, Trevor trailing behind. The coordinator began with medical updates, but I laid the power of attorney on the table. From this point forward, I told them, every decision about my father's care and finances went through me. Sarah rolled her eyes. Emily muttered about control. Trevor said nothing. I didn't need their approval. I had the authority, and I had the proof. As I walked out of that hospital room, I knew this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about dignity, and I was done letting them gamble with his. The account is frozen, the legal authority is mine, and the first confrontation has been made. But a late night anonymous message hints that someone else may be pulling strings. And the next move will decide just how far they're willing to go. It was past midnight when the message came. My phone lit up on the nightstand. "Don't think you're smarter than us. We'll talk tomorrow." No name, no emojis. I didn't need a signature. The tone was all Emily. Still, part of me wondered, was it her, or someone speaking for her? The snow outside my window was falling harder, muffling the world in a white silence. I set the phone face down and poured myself another cup of tea. If they wanted to talk, they'd get one. But it would be on my terms. The next morning, I met with Nora in her office. The walls were lined with neat rows of legal books, but her desk was bare except for a yellow legal pad and a pen. I slid my phone across to her. "This came last night." She read it, her jaw tightening. "It's a bluff. They're testing how much you know, and how much you're willing to act." "I'm willing to act," I said. "I just don't want them to see me coming." Nora leaned back. "Then we give them an opening. Invite them to a conversation that feels safe. Somewhere you can record without them realizing. Then we push them just enough to say more than they should." "And if they don't?" I asked. "Then you've wasted an afternoon and served them cookies," she said dryly. "But I don't think they'll be able to help themselves." I called Emily later that day. "Why don't you and Sarah stop by tonight? We can clear the air." She paused before answering. "Trevor too, if he wants to come," I said, my tone deliberately casual. They agreed. By 6 o'clock, the house was warm from the fire I'd built in the living room. Snow tapped lightly against the windows. I set out coffee, tea, and a plate of cranberry scones. The recorder was clipped to the underside of the coffee table, its tiny light covered with a scrap of tape. Emily came first, wrapped in a camel coat and that familiar cloud of expensive perfume. Sarah followed, scrolling on her phone. Trevor brought up the rear, his face unreadable. We sat, and for a while it was polite small talk. Weather, holiday plans, a vague comment from Trevor about how busy things are back at the firm. Then I shifted. I want to talk about Dad, I said. About how things are going. Emily leaned back. We've already been through this at the hospital. No, I said evenly. We went through legal authority at the hospital. This is about choices. And consequences. Sarah gave a little laugh. Here we go. I kept my voice steady. You've both been accessing Dad's funds without his knowledge. You've made decisions that benefited you, not him. That's not care, it's exploitation. Emily's eyes narrowed. Exploitation. We've spent money to keep him comfortable. We've put in time you weren't here to give. You mean time in Bali? I asked. Sarah's smirk faltered, but Emily didn't blink. You're twisting this. And frankly, when he passes, everything will be ours anyway. We're just smoothing the path. There it was, smooth as ice, and just as treacherous. I let the silence stretch, the recorder taking it all in. Trevor shifted in his seat, finally speaking. Look, maybe it's not perfect, but families handle things differently. You can't just swoop in and act like the sheriff. I'm not acting, I said. I am the sheriff here, and you'd better get used to it. The conversation unraveled after that. Short jabs, defensive postures, the usual passive-aggressive lines. But they'd said enough. More than enough. Later that night, I emailed the recording to Nora. She called within 20 minutes. This is gold, she said. It's admission of intent, of expectation. And it undermines any claim they make about care. Combined with the bank records and your father's statement, this is enough to start formal proceedings. I exhaled. Do it. Are you ready for the fallout? She asked. Yes, I said, because I'm not doing this just for the money. I'm doing it so they never get the chance to treat him like this again. The next day, we filed to make the account freeze permanent, blocked any new lines of credit in Dad's name, and notified his insurance provider of potential fraud. Every safeguard went up like a steel fence. By evening, I knew word had gotten back to them. Emily called twice. I didn't answer. Sarah texted we should talk before this gets ugly. I didn't reply, because this was already ugly, and I intended to see it through. 3 days later, Dad was well enough to be moved from ICU to a step-down unit. He was sitting up in bed when I came in, the morning sun spilling across his blanket. You've been busy, he said, his voice stronger than before. Just tying up loose ends, I said, pouring him a cup of water. He studied me for a long moment. Your mother would be proud. She hated confrontation, but she always believed in standing your ground when it mattered. I smiled. Wes, I got the best of both of you. He chuckled softly. What happens now? Now? I said. We wait. They'll try something else. They always do. And when they do, I'll be ready. That night, as I left the hospital, my phone buzzed again. Another message, different number. You don't know the whole story. Meet me alone. Tomorrow, 5 p.m., the coffee shop on Main. No name, no guarantee it wasn't a trap, but something told me this wasn't Emily or Sarah. And whoever it was, they might have just given me the key to ending this for good. An unexpected contact wants to meet privately, hinting at information Caroline doesn't have. The question is, will it be a warning, a confession, or a setup? By 40:50 the next afternoon, I was parked across the street from Grayson's Cafe, watching snow flurries chase each other across the windshield. The message had been short, almost cryptic. You don't know the whole story. Meet me alone. I didn't like the secrecy, but I liked not knowing even less. I scanned the cafe windows. Warm amber light spilled onto the sidewalk, cutting through the gray afternoon. Inside, the usual mix of college students hunched over laptops, a few retirees nursing mugs, and the barista with the top knot who always looked vaguely irritated. At exactly 5:00, I stepped inside. The bell over the door jingled. I unwound my scarf, eyes moving from table to table. Caroline. The voice came from the far corner. A man in his early 50s, salt and pepper hair, navy pea coat. His eyes were tired but alert, like he'd been carrying something heavy for too long. "You are?" I asked, sliding into the chair across from him. "Name's Mark Bennett. I used to work with Trevor, before he married your daughter." I felt my stomach tighten. "Go on." He leaned in. "I heard what's been going on with your father, and I think you should know. This didn't start with the hospital." The barista dropped off my coffee. We waited until she moved out of earshot. Mark took a sip of his own, then spoke low. "Trevor's in trouble, financially. Not just a little. We're talking 6 figures. Bad investments, some in Bali real estate, of all things. He's been moving money around for months to cover the holes." I stared at him. "And you're telling me this because?" "Because I've seen where some of that money came from. Accounts that didn't belong to him. And I know for a fact one of those accounts was in your father's name." My grip tightened around the coffee mug. "You're saying Trevor's been taking money from my father directly?" "Not just taking. Laundering it. Pulling cash, running it through a shell account, then sending it back to make it look like payment for consulting. Emily and Sarah may not even understand how deep he's in. Or maybe they do. But either way, they're letting him use your dad as a personal ATM." The cafe suddenly felt warmer than it should. "Do you have proof?" He pulled a flash drive from his coat pocket and set it on the table. Statements, transfers, even some emails. I kept copies when I realized what he was doing. "He doesn't know I have them." I looked at the little silver drive. It felt heavier than it should. "Why now?" I asked. Mark's expression darkened. "Because the people he owes money to aren't the kind you want knocking on your door. And if your dad's name keeps getting tied to these accounts, it's not just his savings at risk, it's his reputation, his credit, his safety." When I left the cafe, the snow had stopped, leaving the streets slick and shining under the streetlights. I kept my hand tight around the flash drive in my pocket. By the time I got home, Nora was on speaker, her voice calm but clipped. "If what's on that drive is real, we're not just talking financial exploitation anymore. This is fraud. Possibly wire fraud. That's federal. Then we take it to the police. Eventually. First, we verify everything and make sure your father's accounts are locked tighter than a drum. Then we decide how public you want this to get." I thought of Emily and Sarah, smiling in those Bali photos, cocktails in hand. If they really didn't know they were about to, and if they did, then every smile was just another layer of the lie. The next morning, I was at Nora's office as the sun came up, watching her IT guy pull files from the flash drive. Transaction logs, email threads, even a PDF of a fake consulting invoice. Trevor's signature at the bottom. Nora looked at me over her glasses. "This is enough to put him in front of a judge." I nodded slowly. "Then let's make sure he knows exactly what's coming." Because now, it wasn't just about stopping them. It was about making sure they couldn't crawl out from under what they'd done. With hard proof in hand, Caroline has a choice: go straight to law enforcement or use the evidence as leverage to force a confrontation. But either path risks exposing just how far Trevor's debts have already reached. Nora didn't waste time. By that afternoon, she'd already drawn up the paperwork to place my father's finances under full legal guardianship, me as sole guardian. That meant no one else could move a cent without my written approval. The fraud unit at the bank had the flash drive copies, and Nora's contact in the state attorney's office had agreed to a quiet review. "This keeps you in control," Nora said, sliding the forms across her desk. "It also means if Trevor or anyone else tries to access an account, we get notified immediately. No delays, no excuses." I signed, the pen pressing so hard the tip cut into the paper. "And the confrontation?" I asked. She smiled slightly. "We make them come to you. They'll think they're walking into a conversation about family reconciliation. In reality, it's a deposition without the court reporter." I set the bait that night. A short group text: "One need to talk. No lawyers, no doctors, just family. Tomorrow at Dad's house. 6 p.m. I kept it vague enough to pique curiosity and urgent enough to feel unavoidable. Emily replied first, "Fine." Sarah followed with a thumbs up emoji. Trevor stayed silent. Good. The next day, I arrived early to set the stage. The living room was warm, the lights soft. I placed 3 chairs across from the couch where I'd sit. My father's old leather couch, the one that creaked when you leaned back, the one they all remembered from childhood. On the coffee table, a folder sat dead center, next to a single steaming pot of tea. When they arrived, I greeted them politely. No hugs. Emily wore the same camel coat from the coffee shop. Sarah's hair was pulled back tight, jaw set. Trevor looked cautious, not nervous, just calculating. We sat. I poured tea into 3 cups but didn't push them forward. This isn't about the hospital, I began. It's about the truth. And the truth is, my father's accounts have been used for things that have nothing to do with his care. Trevor's brow furrowed. We've been over this. No, I said evenly. We haven't. I opened the folder and pulled out a printed invoice. This is for consulting services billed to a shell company. It was paid with money from Dad's account. And this. I slid forward another page. Is your signature, Trevor? His face stayed still, but his eyes flickered. I have every transaction, I continued. Every withdrawal, every email. I know about the Bali investments. I know about the debts. Emily's chair creaked as she shifted. Debts? What debts? I didn't look at her. Ask your husband. Trevor finally spoke. You have no idea what you're talking about. I leaned forward. I have proof. Enough to hand over to the state attorney tomorrow morning. Silence. The clock on the mantel ticked loud in the space between us. Sarah broke first. Emily, is this true? Emily didn't answer. Her gaze was locked on Trevor, and for the first time since this all began, I saw something in her eyes. Doubt. Good. Doubt was the first crack. I let the quiet work. Then I spoke softly, almost gently. You have one chance to walk away from this without me pressing charges. You sign an agreement tonight, here, in front of witnesses, relinquishing all access to Dad's finances. Permanently. You also agree to repay every cent taken. And if we don't, Trevor asked. Then you'll spend next Christmas explaining to a judge why you used an old man's savings to pay off a failing Bali resort. That landed. Even Emily flinched. By the end of the night, they'd signed. The signatures were shaky, the room thick with unspoken things. They left without another word. I stayed on the couch long after the door closed, the folder in my lap. This wasn't over, not yet, because signatures on paper didn't erase intent, and people willing to cross that line once could cross it again. The difference now, I'd be watching, and I'd be ready. With legal control secured and a signed agreement in hand, Caroline has neutralized the immediate threat. But the cracks in her daughter's alliance hint at deeper fractures. And one of them might be ready to talk for the right reason. 2 days passed without a word from Emily, Sarah, or Trevor. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the clock in the hallway and the occasional creak of the floorboards under my steps. Dad was stable, resting in the step-down unit. And I'd been spending my mornings with him and my afternoons tightening every loose thread in his finances. I thought the silence meant they'd gone to ground. Then Sarah called. Can we meet? She asked. Her voice was low, almost careful. Just us. Why? I asked. I have something to tell you. And I don't want Emily or Trevor to know I told you. We met at a park by the river, the ground still frozen under a thin layer of snow. She showed up in a knit cap and sunglasses, the kind of disguise you'd laugh at in a movie, but that somehow worked in real life. I didn't know about the debts. She said as soon as we sat on the bench. Not the details. Emily kept saying everything was fine, that Trevor had things under control. I didn't interrupt. I wanted her to keep talking. But there's more, she said. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her coat pocket and handed it to me. I found this in Emily's bag when she left it at my place last week. It was a photocopy of a quitclaim deed, a document transferring ownership of property. The property. My father's house. And the date? 3 weeks ago. My breath caught. They tried to transfer the house. Sarah nodded. Trevor had a friend draw it up. Emily told me it was just to simplify things later, but Caroline, they were going to file it after the new year. Before you came back, I stared at the paper. The forged version of my father's signature was clumsy, but not clumsy enough for a casual eye to catch. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Sarah looked down at her gloved hands. Because I thought you'd find out anyway. And when you did, I didn't want to be standing next to them. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the quitclaim deed in front of me. The flash drive was still in my desk drawer, loaded with Trevor's transactions. Now I had proof they hadn't just been draining bank accounts. They'd been moving toward taking everything. I called Nora. This is worse than we thought, I said. Then we don't wait, she replied. We take the whole package, financials, forged deed, recordings, to the district attorney. And Caroline. Yes, once this ball starts rolling, it won't stop. You need to be ready for the personal fallout. I looked at the paper again. The part of me that still remembered Emily as a little girl in pigtails wanted to believe there was some misunderstanding. But the woman forging my father's signature wasn't that little girl. The next morning, we walked into the district attorney's office. I placed the folder on his desk. This, I said, is everything you need to stop them before they take another dime, or another inch of his life. The DA flipped through the documents, his expression hardening. We can move on this. For the first time in weeks, I felt the knot in my chest loosen, just a little, because this time, they wouldn't see me coming. With law enforcement now involved, Caroline has shifted from defense to offense. But a DA's investigation is public record. And once Emily and Trevor get wind of it, the war will go from cold to scorching, dragging Sarah into the line of fire, whether she's ready or not. The district attorney's office smelled faintly of paper and strong coffee, a combination that felt both grounding and suffocating. I sat across from DA Michael Reese, watching him flip through the evidence Nora and I had brought. Every so often, he would pause, his thumb tapping the corner of a page, and I could see his mind working through the implications. This is substantial, he said finally, glancing up. Bank fraud, forgery, potential real estate theft. We can't ignore it. I nodded, but my hand stayed folded tightly in my lap. We couldn't ignore it. But I had been the one who almost did, months of trusting, of assuming my daughters were incapable of crossing this line. And here we were. Walking out of the DA's office into the cold Vermont air, I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt hollow. It was one thing to suspect your children were selfish. It was another to have hard proof they'd been willing to erase their grandfather's rights, his security, his home. I thought about Emily as a child, how she used to wrap her arms around my neck when I came home from work, how she'd press her cheek to mine and say she wanted to be just like Mommy. Somewhere along the way, that little girl had vanished, replaced by a woman who forged signatures and talked about smoothing the path for an inheritance. Sarah's face came to mind next, the way she'd looked at me in the park, nervous and almost ashamed. I wanted to believe she'd told me the truth, because her conscience had finally screamed louder than her loyalty to Emily. But I also knew fear can look a lot like remorse. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the dim light of the kitchen, a mug of tea cooling beside me, staring at the quitclaim deed. My father's name in shaky ink that wasn't his. Trevor's clean, confident signature beneath it. I imagined the conversation they must have had, deciding to do this. Was it Trevor's idea? Emily's? Did Sarah just nod along to keep the peace? Or had they laughed, sure they'd get away with it, picturing the day they'd have simplified their lives by pushing me aside? The images turned in my head until my chest felt tight. I realized I wasn't just angry. I was grieving. Grieving the family I thought I had, the trust I'd spent decades building, the belief that love and blood were enough to keep certain lines uncrossed. The call came the next afternoon. Emily's voice was clipped, brittle. You went to the DA. I didn't answer immediately. I wanted her to feel the silence. Do you have any idea what you've done? She demanded. Yes, I said finally. I've protected my father. And I've protected what little is left of this family's dignity. She gave a short, humorless laugh. You think dragging us into court is protecting the family? Family, I said slowly, doesn't drain an old man's savings to fund a vacation. Family doesn't forge his signature to take his home. That's your version, she snapped. It's the truth, I replied, my voice steady. And I have the proof. There was a pause, long enough for me to hear her breathing quicken. You've always wanted control, she said finally. Well, congratulations. You've got it. But don't expect us to just roll over. The line went dead. I sat there for a long moment, phone still in my hand. The truth was, part of me had hoped she'd admit it, that she'd drop the act and say she was sorry. Instead, she doubled down. That told me two things. One, she knew exactly what I had on her, and two, she was already thinking about how to fight back. By evening, I got my answer. It started with a post on Facebook, public, tag with my name, A photo of me standing outside the DA's office, taken from across the street. The caption read, "When your own mother tries to ruin you because you didn't live your life her way." Tay family betrayal, truth will come out. Within hours, friends, relatives, and strangers were chiming in. Some defended me, some defended her. Some just speculated, feeding off the drama like vultures. By nightfall, the phone calls started, an aunt in Ohio wanting my side. A neighbor saying Emily had stopped by, in tears, claiming I was trying to have her arrested over a misunderstanding. It was exactly what Emily wanted, to make me the villain before the legal process could paint the real picture. I stood at my kitchen window, watching snow fall under the glow of the streetlight. I thought about calling her, about trying to contain the damage. But then I remembered my father's words the night I showed him the power of attorney. Do what you have to. He hadn't meant keep the peace. He'd meant protect what matters, even if it meant letting the rest burn. And maybe that was the hardest truth of all. Sometimes you can't have both justice and a family. Sometimes choosing one means burying the other. The next morning I called Nora. "They've gone public," I said. "So will we." She didn't even hesitate. "Press conference." "No," I said. "We don't need cameras. We need the court of record. I want that filing in the system today." When I hung up, I realized my hands weren't shaking. Emily had wanted a war. She was about to get one. The public smear campaign has begun. But Caroline's decision to escalate the legal battle means the next round will unfold in court filings, sworn statements, and evidence that can't be spun away. The question is, how far will Emily go when the walls start closing in? The summons went out on a Tuesday morning, served by a deputy who didn't linger. A short knock, a folded packet, and by noon, Emily had posted a cryptic Instagram story about fighting for what's right. But this time, she couldn't control the narrative. Because this wasn't Facebook. This was the county courthouse. The pre-hearing was set for Thursday at 10:00 a.m. It wasn't a trial, just a motion to establish permanent guardianship of my father's finances and to preserve the fraud evidence in an official record. But for Emily and Trevor, it was the first time they'd have to answer in front of someone who couldn't be manipulated with charm or social media sympathy. I arrived early with Nora. We sat at the plaintiff's table, her briefcase open, evidence tabs peeking out like colored flags. I glanced toward the door each time it opened. Waiting, they walked in at 9:52. Emily in a navy blazer, chin high. Trevor beside her in a gray suit that looked expensive but slightly rumpled. Sarah trailed a step behind, her eyes flicking toward me, then away. I didn't move, didn't greet them, didn't give them the satisfaction. The judge entered, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a voice that could cut through stone. "We're here on Whittaker vs. Whittaker et al. Petition for guardianship and preservation of financial evidence. Counsel, you may proceed." Nora stood, her voice steady and deliberate. "Your Honor, we have presented clear documentation of unauthorized financial activity, including withdrawals, transfers, and a forged quitclaim deed regarding Mr. Whittaker's home. These actions occurred while Mr. Whittaker was hospitalized and incapacitated. My client seeks permanent guardianship to prevent further harm." The judge nodded. Defense. Trevor stood. He was representing himself and Emily. Dangerous, but very much his style. "Your Honor, this is a family matter being blown out of proportion. My father-in-law was cared for. Expenses were incurred for his comfort. Any suggestion of forgery or exploitation is a misunderstanding." Nora didn't even flinch. "Your Honor, we have the recordings." The judge's eyebrows lifted. "Recordings." I leaned forward slightly. Nora pressed play on a small speaker. The audio filling the courtroom, Emily's voice, calm and unmistakable. "Once he's gone, it all comes to us eventually. We're just getting ahead of it." The silence after was heavier than any gavel. Trevor cleared his throat. Out of context, the judge cut him off. "Mr. Barnes, I've heard enough for today. The petition for guardianship is granted on a provisional basis pending full review. All access to Mr. Whittaker's assets by the respondents is suspended effective immediately." Emily's face flushed red. Trevor's jaw tightened. Sarah looked relieved. And that told me more than words could. Outside the courtroom, Nora leaned toward me. "They're going to come after you harder now. But you've got the leverage." I nodded. Watching Emily and Trevor stalk down the hallway, Trevor whispering something sharp that made Emily's shoulders stiffen. Sarah lagged behind, glanced over her shoulder at me, then hurried to catch up. The war wasn't over, but the first battle was mine. That night, I sat beside my father's hospital bed, telling him what had happened. "So you're in charge now?" he asked, his eyes tired but bright. "Yes," I said. "Legally, financially, everything. They can't touch a cent." He reached over and squeezed my hand. "Good. Don't let them back in, Caroline. Not even if they say the right things." I smiled faintly. "I won't." But I also knew something he didn't. That winning in court was one thing. Winning in the shadows, where grudges festered and desperation grew sharp, that was going to be the real fight. With provisional guardianship secured, Caroline has the legal upper hand. But Emily and Trevor, cornered and humiliated, are more dangerous than ever, and Sarah's quiet relief hints she may become either an ally or a liability. It started small. A whisper here, a sideways glance there. By Monday morning, I'd gotten 3 separate calls from people I barely spoke to anymore. Each of them opened with some variation of, "Hey, I heard," and ended with a piece of gossip about me that was twisted just enough to sting. Apparently, I'd cut my father off from the rest of the family, because I wanted to keep him all to myself. Apparently, I was selling his house behind everyone's back. Apparently, I was planning to put him in a nursing home so I could travel again. All lies, all carefully seeded. I didn't need a detective to know where it came from. Nora confirmed it that afternoon. "They're working the credibility angle," she said, scrolling through a printed Facebook thread. "Trevor's been feeding this to anyone who'll listen. Emily's playing the heartbroken daughter, devastated by your betrayal. Classic misdirection," I said. "Make me the villain. So anything I say sounds like a cover up. They're betting on public opinion getting loud enough to make the DA back off." Nora said. "You want me to shut it down?" I shook my head. "Not yet. Let them talk. The more they talk, the sloppier they'll get." But in the quiet of my kitchen that night, I felt the old ache creep in, that deep, tired sadness that comes from realizing your own child is willing to scorch the earth if it means you lose your footing. 2 days later, Sarah showed up at my door. No text, no call, just a knock. She looked different. Paler, tighter around the eyes. She stepped inside and stood in the entryway like she wasn't sure she should be there. "I'm sorry about what's being said," she began. I didn't start any of it." "That's not the same as stopping it," I said. Her gaze dropped. "I know. But Emily and Trevor, they're planning something else. Bigger." I waited. "They want to challenge the guardianship by claiming you're mentally unfit." Her voice wavered. "Trevor's already talking to someone who can write up a statement, a psychologist, I think, but not legit." The laugh that slipped out of me was sharp and humorless. "So now I'm unstable." Sarah's eyes lifted. "They're desperate. You embarrass them in court. They want to hit back." I studied her for a moment. "And where do you stand in all this?" She hesitated. "I don't want to be in the middle." "You are in the middle," I said. "The question is, which side are you on?" She didn't answer right away, but she didn't look away, either. After she left, I sat at the table, fingers drumming against the wood. The pieces were shifting again. If Trevor was willing to fake medical testimony, it meant he was ready to cross into a different kind of crime, one that could undermine me completely if it stuck. And Sarah, she was leaning toward me. But leaning wasn't loyalty. Leaning could tip either way. That night Nora called. "I've been thinking," she said. "If they're building a case against your mental capacity, we flip it. We get ahead of them. Voluntarily undergo an evaluation from a state-certified psychologist, someone the court trusts." I smiled. "Turn their bullet into my shield." "Exactly," she said. "Once we have that report, anything they produce will look like what it is, a fabrication." For the first time in days, I felt that knot in my chest loosen just a little. Let them come. I was already digging the hole they'd fall into. As Emily and Trevor prepare to attack Caroline's credibility, Caroline moves first, planning to weaponize the truth before their lies can take hold. But Sarah's hesitation, and what she knows, could be the deciding factor in how brutal the next round will be. The psychologist's office was warm in that deliberate, staged way. Soft lighting, muted colors, a strategically placed plant in the corner. Helen Morris was in her early 60s, sharp-eyed behind wire, rimmed glasses, and the kind of calm that could make even a guilty man start confessing. "I understand you requested this evaluation voluntarily," she said as we sat. "That's right," I replied. "I'd like a full report on my mental and cognitive fitness for legal purposes." Her pen paused. "That's unusual. So is trying to have your own daughter declare you incompetent so she can get to your father's assets?" I said dryly. She didn't flinch, just made a note. "Let's begin." The session took nearly 2 hours. Memory recall tests, logic exercises, emotional regulation assessments. I answered every question, met every gaze. I didn't rush, didn't overcompensate. By the end, Dr. Morris closed her folder with a faint smile. "You have nothing to worry about," she said. "I'll have a written statement to your attorney by the end of the week." As I walked out into the crisp air, I felt lighter. Trevor's mentally unfit card was already folding before it was even played. That afternoon, Sarah called again. "Emily's furious," she said without preamble. "Trevor, too. They know about the evaluation. They think you're trying to humiliate them." "I'm protecting myself," I said. "If that humiliates them, maybe they should ask themselves why." She hesitated. "They're not going to stop Caroline. Trevor says he still has ways to win. And Emily's, she's different lately. Meaner. She talks about you like you're not even family. She stopped thinking of me as family the moment she forged Dad's signature," I said. Sarah was quiet. I could almost hear her breathing through the line. "I don't want to take sides," she said finally. "I don't want to be standing next to them if this goes bad." "It is going to go bad," I told her. "The only question is who it's going to go bad for." For the next 2 days, the silence between us all was almost unnatural. No calls, no texts, no cryptic social media posts. It was like the calm before a storm, and I knew enough about storms to recognize when the air was about to change. On the third morning, Nora called. "The DA's office wants Sarah to give a statement," she said. "They think she might have information that confirms the forged deed and the bank withdrawals." She hasn't agreed. Not yet. But Caroline, if she does, it could seal the case. I stared out the kitchen window, watching the sun glare off the snow. Or it could blow back on her so hard she runs straight into Emily's arms again. "That's the risk," Nora said. "She's in the gray right now. You can't force her across the line." "No," I agreed. "But I can make sure she knows where the safer ground is." That evening I called Sarah. I didn't push, didn't plead. I told her about Dad's condition in detail, the bills I'd covered. The quiet evenings I'd spent sitting by his bed while Emily and Trevor were busy posting sunsets from Bali. I told her about the evaluation, about how I'd taken away their best weapon before they could use it. "You have a choice," I said finally. "You can stand with them when this falls apart, or you can stand on the side that's telling the truth. I'm not asking you to pick me. I'm asking you to pick what's right." She didn't answer right away, but when she did, her voice was low, steady. "I'll think about it." And in that moment, I knew she was closer to stepping over than she'd ever been. Late that night, as I was locking up, my phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "I'll give the statement." Sarah's decision to testify could blow the case wide open. But it also paints a target on her back. And with Emily and Trevor backed into a corner, the fight is about to turn from calculated moves to outright retaliation. Sarah arrived at the district attorney's office on a Wednesday morning that felt colder than it had any right to be. The sky was the flat, pale gray that always comes before a snowstorm, and the wind coming off the river had a bite to it. She was early, 20 minutes early, and I could tell from the way she kept her hands shoved deep into her coat pockets that she'd been psyching herself up for this. I was already inside with Nora when she walked in. No makeup, hair pulled back, she looked younger, somehow, more like the little girl I used to pack lunches for than the grown woman I'd been tiptoeing around for months. "You ready?" I asked. She nodded once, quick. "Let's just do it." The statement took 2 hours. Sarah started slow, her voice tight, but as she went on, the words came easier. She told them about the bank withdrawals, about Emily's casual comments on getting ahead of it, about the quitclaim deed she'd found in Emily's bag. The DA's investigator, a man named Rourke, asked careful follow-ups. Did Emily or Trevor ever mention what they planned to do with the house once it was transferred? Sarah hesitated, then nodded. Trevor talked about using it as collateral for a loan. Emily said it would be a way to make sure Mom doesn't get too comfortable. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Too comfortable. As if my father's home was some kind of leverage against me. When it was over, Rourke thanked her and promised to follow up. As we walked out, Sarah exhaled hard, like she'd been holding her breath for weeks. "That's it?" she asked. "For now," I said. "You did the right thing." The backlash came faster than I expected. By that evening, Emily had called Nora's office twice, furious. Trevor sent Sarah a single text, "Hope it was worth it." And then the real retaliation started. Sarah's landlord, who just happened to be an old golfing buddy of Trevor's, suddenly decided her lease was under review due to noise complaints. A mutual friend texted her screenshots of Emily implying on social media that Sarah had betrayed the family for money. Some even left a dead bouquet of flowers on her apartment doorstep. No note attached. By Friday, Sarah was at my door again, eyes wide, hands shaking. "They're trying to scare me. You knew they might," I said. "They want you to back down. Or better yet, make you look unreliable." "I'm not backing down," she said quickly. Then her voice dropped. "But I don't know how much more of this I can take." That night, I sat by my father's bed and told him everything. Sarah's statement, the retaliation, the way Emily and Trevor were tightening the screws. He listened quietly, then reached for my hand. "You stand with her," he said simply. "If she's trying to do the right thing, you don't let her stand alone." I nodded. "I won't." But as I left the hospital, the thought pressed in. Standing with her meant painting both of us as targets, and Emily and Trevor had already proven they weren't afraid to go low. By Monday, Nora had filed for a protective order, not just for my father, but for Sarah. It wouldn't stop the whispers or the dirty tricks, but it would make certain lines harder to cross without legal consequences. When the DA's office served Emily and Trevor with the notice, I heard from 3 different sources that Trevor had thrown the papers across the kitchen and punched a cabinet door. Emily had locked herself in the bedroom for hours. They knew the walls were closing in, and people with no way out, they get dangerous. Sarah is now openly aligned with Caroline, under legal protection, but in the direct path of Emily and Trevor's anger. With the investigation tightening, the next move will determine whether this ends in a negotiated collapse or an all-out family detonation. The call from the district attorney came on a Tuesday morning. Nora put it on speaker so I could hear every word. "We're close," DA Reese said. "With Sarah's statement and the financial evidence, we have enough for probable cause. We'll need her to testify at the preliminary hearing. If she's willing." "She is," I said without hesitation. "But we need to be ready for blowback." Reese didn't sugarcoat it. "Once we move, the gloves come off. They'll know exactly what we have, and they'll do everything they can to discredit it." After the call, the kitchen felt too quiet. I stared at the steam curling off my coffee and thought about what gloves off meant in Emily's world. She'd already tried smearing me online. She'd already gone after Sarah's housing. What was left? The answer came that afternoon. Sarah showed up unannounced, pale and tight-jawed. Emily came to my place. I motioned for her to sit. "What happened?" She didn't knock. Just walked in while I was in the kitchen. Said she wanted to talk like sisters. Sarah's hands trembled as she wrapped them around the mug I gave her. But it wasn't talking. It was bargaining. I waited. She said if I corrected my statement, said it was all a misunderstanding, she'd make sure Trevor let the lease thing go, and she'd stop posting about me. Sarah's voice cracked on the next part. "And if I didn't," she said, "she'd make sure people knew every mistake I've ever made. That I'd look like a liar before I even got to court." I felt my jaw tighten. "What did you say?" Sarah looked up, eyes wet but steady. "I told her if she had something to say about me, she could say it under oath, in front of the judge." A slow, fierce heat bloomed in my chest. She'd crossed the line, and this time she hadn't looked back. That night, I sat by my father's hospital bed, telling him about the encounter. His hand was warm in mine, his gaze sharp despite the fatigue. "She's scared," he said. "Scared people lash out. But remember, they lash out because they can't go forward." "I know," I said. "But the closer we get, the more I wonder how far they'll go to keep this from court." He squeezed my hand. "You've already taken back control. Now finish it. 2 days later, Reese confirmed the date for the preliminary hearing, 3 weeks away. Enough time for the defense to scramble. Enough time for them to try something reckless. And that's exactly what happened. Late Friday night, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. If Sarah testifies, she won't make it to the courthouse. No name. No punctuation. Just the cold, flat promise of intimidation. I stared at it for a long moment, then forwarded it to Nora and Reese. This wasn't just family betrayal anymore. It was criminal. With a direct threat now on record, the DA must decide whether to add intimidation charges to the case. And Caroline has to navigate the dangerous weeks before the hearing, knowing the other side is willing to go beyond legal limits to stop them. The morning after the threat, DA Reese called at 7:15 sharp. "We're adding it to the case," he said. "Witness intimidation. That text isn't just a scare tactic, it's a felony." "I figured as much," I replied. "But do you have any way of proving who sent it?" "Not yet. We've subpoenaed the carrier. In the meantime, I'm arranging for protective measures for you and Sarah." This doesn't wait until the hearing. Protective measures. The phrase felt heavy, foreign, like it belonged in a crime drama, not my life. By that evening, a plainclothes deputy named Mark Keegan was parked across the street from my house in an unmarked SUV. He was polite, quiet. The kind of man who could blend into a crowd until you realized he'd been watching you the whole time. Sarah had her own coverage. Rotating shifts of deputies checking her apartment and walking her to her car. It should have made me feel safer. Instead, it made me realize just how far we'd fallen from the definition of family. The first week was the hardest. Every errand felt like moving through a fog of suspicion. Was the man loitering near the grocery store, just waiting for a ride, or was he watching? Did the car that turned with me 3 streets in a row just happen to be headed the same way, or was it deliberate? Sarah called me nearly every night. Sometimes she had concrete updates, another cryptic voicemail she'd saved for the DA, another strange, accidental encounter with Trevor in public. Other times, she just wanted to talk about anything but the case, her voice restless in the quiet. I listened. I didn't tell her how much I worried that this pressure might still push her back toward Emily. In the second week, Trevor made his move. Not toward me, but toward public opinion. A glossy, carefully written post appeared on his professional networking page, a glowing tribute to family unity, in times of hardship, peppered with vague references to those who seek to divide rather than heal. It never named me, but anyone who'd been following our mess could connect the dots. Within hours, the comments were full of his allies praising his strength and commitment. And the subtext was clear: I was the divider. Nora saw it for what it was. This isn't about convincing the public. It's about rattling Sarah, making her feel like she's siding with the villain. Then we make sure she knows who the villain really is, I said. The third week crept in like the slow tightening of a noose. The air in Vermont had that brittle, late, winter chill, and the courthouse loomed on the calendar like a fixed point I couldn't move or avoid. 2 nights before the hearing, Sarah came over for dinner. We ate in the quiet warmth of my kitchen. Roast chicken, potatoes, nothing fancy. At one point, she put her fork down and said, "I've been thinking about what happens after." After the hearing, she nodded. Even if we win, even if they're charged, we don't go back to normal, do we? I shook my head. No, there's no going back. But there's forward. And forward means Dad is safe. It means you're safe. She looked at me for a long moment. Then I guess forward is enough. That night after she left, I stood at the window watching the unmarked SUV idle across the street. Somewhere out there, Emily and Trevor were planning their next move. But so was I. When the courthouse doors opened in 48 hours, there wouldn't be anywhere left for them to hide. With the hearing just days away, tensions are at their peak. Protective details shadow every move, and both sides are preparing to strike. What happens next will be the first public, undeniable clash, where family secrets become part of the record forever. The morning of the hearing broke cold and bright. The kind of February light that made everything sharper. The edges of rooftops, the glint of ice on the sidewalks, the expression in people's eyes when they didn't want to be here. I arrived with Nora at 80:45, my breath clouding in the air as we climbed the courthouse steps. Inside, the marble floors echoed under our shoes, the sound carrying in the wide hall lined with oak benches. Sarah was already there, sitting with her coat folded neatly in her lap. She looked calm, but I noticed her thumb rubbing at the seam of her glove in a slow, tight rhythm. Our eyes met, and she gave me a small nod. Then the air changed. Emily and Trevor appeared at the far end of the hallway, moving like they owned the space. Emily wore a fitted black coat, her hair perfectly smoothed back. Trevor's suit was dark and crisp, his expression unreadable. They didn't head straight for the courtroom door. They angled toward us. "Big day," Emily said as they stopped in front of our bench. Her smile was tight, her voice pitched just low enough for only us to hear. "Hope you've enjoyed the show. Because this is where it ends." I kept my tone even. "You're right about one thing, it's ending. Just not for me." Trevor's eyes flicked to Sarah. "You sure you want to go through with this? Families have long memories." Sarah's jaw tightened. "Some things are worth remembering." A muscle ticked in Emily's cheek. "You think you're on the right side now, but when she's done using you," she tipped her head toward me, "you'll realize you burned the wrong bridge." I felt Sarah inhale beside me, a sharp, steady breath. "The only bridge I'm burning," she said, "is the one that led me to this mess." Trevor's smile thinned. "See you inside." They walked away without looking back, but the tension clung to the hallway like static. In the courtroom, the hum of voices was low but constant until the bailiff called for order. The judge took the bench, papers stacked neatly before her. "This is a preliminary hearing in the matter of Whittaker versus Whittaker et al. Regarding allegations of financial exploitation, forgery," she read. The words echoed off the walls, formal, heavy, final. Beside me, Sarah sat straighter. Across the aisle, Emily's smile had vanished. And as the judge called the first witness, I knew we'd just crossed the point of no return. The hearing has begun, the hallway battle lines have been drawn, and the first witness is about to testify. With the tension already boiling, what comes out in sworn testimony could either seal the case or blow it wide open. The clerk swore Sarah in, her right hand raised, voice steady as she promised to tell the truth. I watched her walk to the witness stand, her coat and gloves left behind on the bench like discarded armor. The DA Reese approached with a measured calm. "Ms. Whittaker, can you state your relation to the plaintiff?" "I'm her daughter," Sarah said. Her voice carried, clear, no tremor. "And your relation to Mr. Daniel Whittaker, my grandfather?" Reese nodded. "Ms. Whittaker, did you observe any financial activity concerning your grandfather's accounts during the time he was hospitalized last December?" Sarah glanced at me briefly, then back at Reese. "Yes, I saw withdrawals from his account, large ones, just under the reporting limit, made by Emily Whittaker and Trevor Barnes." A ripple moved through the courtroom. Reese kept his pace slow. "Did you ever discuss these withdrawals with them?" "Yes. Emily told me it was just jetting ahead of what would be ours anyway after he passed. Trevor called it managing the situation." "And did you at any point see documentation regarding your grandfather's home?" Sarah's jaw tightened. "I found a quitclaim deed in Emily's bag. It transferred the house into Emily's name. My grandfather's signature on it, it wasn't his." From the defense table, Emily shifted in her seat, but she didn't speak. Reese stepped back. No further questions. Trevor rose slowly, buttoning his jacket before approaching the stand. His smile was thin, the kind he wore when he thought he was about to outmaneuver someone. "Sarah," he began, voice oily smooth, "isn't it true you and your sister have disagreed before? That you've had tension in your relationship?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "And isn't it true that you've been staying close to your mother during this process? That she's been influencing you?" Sarah leaned forward slightly. "If you're asking whether she told me to lie, the answer is no. If you're asking whether she's the reason I felt safe enough to tell the truth, the answer is yes." A few muffled chuckles from the gallery. Trevor's jaw flexed. He tried again. "So you'd do anything to protect your mother?" Sarah's eyes didn't leave his. "Not anything. Just the right thing." Trevor hesitated, then returned to the defense table. When the judge called a short recess, Sarah stepped down and walked past me. Her hand brushed my arm, just a fleeting touch, but enough to say, "I'm still here. I'm not backing down." Across the aisle, Emily sat rigid, her eyes locked on some point beyond the wall, refusing to look at me. And I knew then, we'd landed the first real hit. But the fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. With Sarah's testimony delivered, the prosecution has momentum, but the defense still has its turn. Emily may yet take the stand, and if she does, she'll either crumble under cross-examination or find a way to twist the narrative in one last desperate attempt. When the recess ended, the defense wasted no time. Trevor stood, buttoned his jacket, and said, "The defense calls Emily Whittaker to the stand." I felt my father's hand tighten around mine, where he sat beside me in the gallery. He'd insisted on being here for this part, oxygen cannula and all. Emily took the oath with her chin high, her voice steady. She moved to the witness chair like it was a stage she'd been preparing for. Trevor started with the soft questions. "Emily, how would you describe your relationship with your grandfather?" Her expression softened on cue. "Close. Loving. I visited often. Helped manage things when he got sick. And your mother, Caroline?" A small, calculated pause. "We've had differences. She's always been controlling. Sometimes it felt like she wanted to make decisions for everyone, not just herself." Trevor nodded slowly, letting the words settle. "Let's talk about the finances. Did you ever take money from your grandfather's accounts for personal use?" "No," she said firmly. Any withdrawals were for his comfort, better food, private accommodations, things the insurance wouldn't cover. And the quitclaim deed. Her voice trembled, just slightly. Enough to look human. That was blown out of proportion. Trevor suggested it as a way to make sure the house stayed in the family. I didn't plan to file it until we could discuss it as a family. Across the aisle, I kept my face still. Every word was a blend of truth and omission, carefully mixed to sound reasonable. When Trevor finished, Reese stood, "Ems Whittaker, you said withdrawals were for your grandfather's comfort. Can you explain why several occurred while you were in Bali?" Emily's mouth opened, then closed. "I arranged them before I left." "Interesting," Reese said, flipping through a document. "Because bank surveillance footage shows you physically present during at least one withdrawal date in that period." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Emily's jaw tightened. "I must have the dates wrong." "And the quitclaim deed," Reese continued. "If it was just to keep the house in the family, why was the signature a poor match for your grandfather's legal signature on file?" Her voice sharpened. "I don't know. Maybe he was tired when he signed, or," Reese said evenly, "maybe he didn't sign it at all." The gallery was silent. When Emily stepped down, she avoided looking at me, at Sarah, at anyone. Her seat beside Trevor felt smaller than it had when she first walked in. The judge set the date for the full trial, but I knew what we'd just seen. Emily's armor had cracked, and cracks have a way of spreading fast. Outside the courthouse, the winter air was sharp enough to sting. Sarah stood beside me, her breath misting in the cold. "You think she knows it's over?" she asked. I watched Emily and Trevor cross the parking lot, their shoulders tight, their steps quick. "She knows," I said. "She just hasn't accepted it yet." And as the wind picked up, I felt it. This fight was shifting from the courtroom toward the inevitable end. All that was left was to walk it there. Emily's testimony has left more questions than answers, and the trial is now a formality. But as the verdict looms, Caroline must face the final choice: seek only legal justice, or deliver a personal reckoning that will ensure they can never touch her family again. The trial date was set for a Tuesday. That left 6 long days in between, days that felt both too short and unbearably long. The morning after the preliminary hearing, I woke before dawn. The house was still. The only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional shift of wind against the windows. My coffee went cold as I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the manila folder Reese had left me. Copies of evidence, transcripts of Sarah's testimony, banking records that told a story in black and white numbers. The truth was there, but truth and justice weren't always the same thing. Sarah spent most of the week at her apartment, though we spoke daily. Sometimes she sounded strong, making plans for after this was over. Other times, she sounded like she was holding her breath, waiting for something to break. "They're not talking to me anymore," she said one night. "No calls, no visits. Just silence." "That's not punishment," I told her. "That's them losing control." Still, I could hear the loneliness in her voice. Silence from family, real or not, wasn't the kind you could ignore. Midweek, Nora came by with 2 paper bags of groceries and a stack of printouts. "Background on Trevor," she said, sliding into a chair. He's got a history, minor stuff. Nothing criminal, but enough to paint a picture. We went through them together: unpaid debts, inflated business claims, a habit of disappearing when money got tight. It wasn't smoking, gun material, but it showed a pattern. People like him, Nora said, they get sloppy when they feel cornered. That thought stayed with me. Sloppiness meant mistakes, and mistakes meant leverage. On Sunday, the weather turned. Heavy snow fell all morning, muting the world into shades of white. I drove to the hospital to see my father, the roads quiet except for the hiss of tires on slush. He was sitting up in bed when I arrived, a blanket over his knees. "You're ready for this?" he said before I'd even taken off my coat. "I think so." "No, you know so. The waiting just makes you doubt it." I sat beside him, the snow falling in thick, lazy flakes outside the window. "What if the verdict doesn't go our way?" "Then you fight another way," he said simply. "But either way, you'll walk out knowing you didn't let them decide who you are." The night before the trial, I barely slept. I packed my bag twice: notes, water, tissues, a pen that felt good in my hand. When dawn finally came, I was already up, the house dim and cold. As I locked the front door behind me, the street was quiet. No reporters yet, no deputies idling across the way. Just the sharp winter air and the knowledge that by the end of the day, something would be decided. And I was ready to hear it. The trial is about to begin. Emily and Trevor will hear the verdict that could strip them of everything they've fought to keep. And Caroline will finally learn whether the law will give her the justice she's been chasing. By the time we filed into the courtroom, the air felt thicker than it had all week, like every unspoken word from the past months had condensed into something you could almost touch. The prosecution side was neat and steady, Rees at the center with his file folders stacked like bricks. Across the aisle, Emily sat rigid in a deep blue dress, Trevor leaning toward her, whispering something I couldn't hear. She didn't nod. She didn't look at him. The judge called for closing statements. Rees stood first. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, "this case is not about family disagreements. It's about exploitation, about two individuals who saw a vulnerable man, Mr. Daniel Whittaker, laid up in a hospital bed and decided it was an opportunity." He paced slowly, holding their eyes one by one. "You've seen the bank records. You've heard the testimony from Miss Caroline Whittaker and her daughter Sarah. You've seen the forged deed. This isn't speculation. This is evidence." Rees stopped just in front of the jury box. "The defense wants you to believe this was a misunderstanding, that all of this could be explained away as miscommunication. But theft by a stranger or theft by blood, it's still theft." His voice softened. "You have the chance to tell them that families don't get to rewrite morality just because they share DNA." He returned to his table, leaving the words to echo. Trevor rose for the defense, his tone lower, almost pleading. "Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard a lot about my client's actions. What you haven't heard is the full picture of intent. Yes, mistakes were made, but were they criminal? Or were they the messy, complicated acts of a family under stress?" He turned to the jury with an almost weary smile. "If every bad family decision were a crime, our prisons would be overflowing." He glanced at Emily, then back to the jurors. "My clients didn't come here today as villains. They came as people trying to hold on to what they thought was already theirs." It was skillful, measured without being fairy, but it rang hollow after the week we'd had. When the judge dismissed the jury for deliberations, the room emptied into a low buzz of movement. Outside in the hallway, Sarah leaned against the wall, her coat still draped over her arm. "How long do you think it'll take?" she asked. "Could be hours. Could be days," I said. "But after everything we've laid out, I think they already know." We didn't speak after that. We just waited. And when the bailiff's voice came down the hallway, "We have a verdict." It was like the air shifted again, heavier and lighter all at once. We filed back into the courtroom, the jury already in their seats. The foreperson stood, a folded sheet of paper in hand. And just like that, the waiting was over. The jury is ready. The verdict is about to be read. In the next minutes, everything Caroline, Sarah, and Daniel have fought for will either be protected or lost to Emily and Trevor forever. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the faint tick of the wall clock behind the judge's bench. The foreperson unfolded the paper slowly, eyes scanning the words before lifting their gaze. "Don't look away," I told myself. Whatever happens, don't look away. On the charge of financial exploitation, the foreperson began, who find the defendant. Emily Whittaker guilty. A sharp inhale cut the air behind me. Someone in the gallery. Emily didn't flinch. Her face stayed frozen, lips pressed thin. On the charge of forgery of a legal document, we find the defendant guilty. Trevor shifted in his seat, his jaw tight. Emily's hands, resting on the table, curled into fists. The foreperson's voice was steady. On the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud, we find the defendants Emily Whittaker and Trevor Barnes guilty. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until I felt it leave me all at once. Beside me, Sarah's shoulders dropped, a slow exhale escaping her. The judge thanked the jury, then began outlining sentencing procedures. I barely heard her. My ears were full of the thud of my own heartbeat. Emily sat motionless, but her eyes had lost their steel. Trevor leaned in, whispered something. She didn't respond. When court adjourned, the bailiff moved toward the defense table. Emily stood, her chin still high, but her eyes slid toward me for the first time in weeks. There was no fire in them now. Just recognition. She knew it was over. I didn't move toward her. I didn't need to. Justice had crossed the room for me. Sarah touched my arm. "It's done," she said, and for the first time since this began, I believed her. Outside, the cold air felt different, brighter somehow. The press clustered at the bottom of the courthouse steps, microphones ready, cameras aimed. Reese handled them, his voice calm and measured. I didn't stop. I walked past the questions, past the flashing lights, past everything that had held me here for months. Because now, finally, I was free to walk toward something else. With the verdict delivered, the legal fight is over. But freedom brings new questions. What does rebuilding look like after a war like this? And can Caroline truly move forward without settling the unfinished, personal part of the reckoning? The verdict spread faster than I expected. By the time I got home that night, my voicemail was full, neighbors offering congratulations. Distant relatives I hadn't heard from in years suddenly checking in. Even a reporter from the local radio station wanting a human angle interview. I didn't call anyone back. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea gone lukewarm, listening to the furnace hum in the background. The silence in the house was different now, less like absence, more like peace. The first real sign of fallout came from my brother, Mark. He called on the second day after the trial. "I heard about the verdict," he said. His voice was clipped, but not cold. "You know this means things are going to change. People in the family are taking sides." "I didn't know there were sides to take," I said. "There was the truth, and then there was theft. That's not how they see it," he replied. "Some of them think you should have handled this privately." I laughed once, short and bitter. Privately is how they got away with it for so long. He didn't argue. But when we hung up, I knew. Holidays, reunions, even chance encounters at the grocery store. None of it would ever be the same. Sarah came over that weekend. She brought a grocery bag and left it on the counter, like she'd always done when she was a teenager and still lived here. "I don't know what's going to happen with Emily," she said as we made dinner. "She's not talking to anyone, not even Dad's side of the family. She made her choices," I said, stirring the pot. "She can live with them." But as I said it, I felt the sting of truth. I wasn't angry anymore. I was tired, the kind of tired you feel after finishing a marathon you never signed up for. In town, the reaction split cleanly in two. Some people stopped me in the hardware store or post office, their voices low but approving. "You did the right thing." Others avoided my gaze entirely, crossing the street rather than acknowledge me. I could guess whose phone calls they still took. And yet, the weight on my shoulders had shifted. This wasn't about belonging anymore. It was about standing upright in a place where people had seen me fight and refused to bow. One night, as I closed the blinds in the living room, I caught my reflection in the window. I looked older, yes, but there was something in my face I hadn't seen in a long time. It wasn't victory. It was something quieter, but stronger. It was ownership. Of my choices, of my name, of my place in this world. The trial had taken months. The rebuilding would take longer. But it would be mine to decide. And Emily, Trevor. They were no longer part of the equation. The legal fight is over. The family is fractured. But a box of unsent letters from Caroline's late father surfaces, containing truths that could either cement her peace or pull her back into a fight she thought she'd finished. It was late March when the box arrived. No return address, just my name written in a careful, looping hand I recognized immediately. My father's. It shouldn't have been possible. He'd passed away in February, just weeks after the trial ended. But the postmark told me it had been mailed 2 days before he died. The cardboard was worn at the corners. Inside, beneath layers of folded newspaper, was a stack of envelopes bound together with twine. A note sat on top, his handwriting shakier than I remembered Caroline. I found these going through the attic. I think you should have them. Do what you will. Dad, the letters were addressed to my mother, to my uncle, even to Emily's father. Some postmarked 30 years ago but never sent. The ink was faded, the paper soft at the folds. I sat at the dining room table and read every one. They weren't about money. Not directly. They were about choices, who got to make them, and who had to live with them. One line in a letter to my uncle stopped me cold. The danger isn't that someone will take from you. The danger is they'll convince you it was never yours to begin with. That night, I sat with the letters spread across the table, like a map of everything we'd never said aloud in my family. I thought about Emily. About how the trial had stripped her of her victories, but not her belief that she'd been entitled to them. I realized then, I'd been chasing a kind of justice the law couldn't give me the power to make her understand. But some people don't understand. They only lose. In April, I visited my father's grave. The grass was just starting to green, the ground soft from spring rain. I got your box, I told him. You were right. They can't take what you don't give. I left one of the letters tucked under the vase. A copy of the line about danger and ownership. Maybe someday Sarah would come here, read it and know exactly why I'd fought so hard. Life after the trial wasn't clean. Mark still kept his distance. Some neighbors thawed, others didn't. There were days I still woke up braced for a fight that wasn't coming. But there were also mornings I stood in my kitchen, coffee in hand, and felt a kind of stillness I hadn't known in years. I planted a garden that spring, not because I needed the food, but because I liked the idea of tending something that would grow only if I cared for it. Every seed I pressed into the soil felt like a small claim on the future. Mine. I haven't spoken to Emily since the day of the verdict. I probably never will. And that's fine. Some roads aren't worth walking again, no matter how familiar they look on the map. Because in the end, what we keep isn't the land or the bank accounts or the signatures on a deed. It's the ground inside us, the part no one else can plant or steal. And I intend to keep mine for as long as I can stand on it. Sometimes the hardest part of winning is accepting that you'll never get an apology, only the absence of further harm. Justice is not the same as reconciliation, and peace isn't something others give you. It's something you decide to take back for yourself. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who's had to stand up to family and fight for what's theirs. Your worth isn't up for debate, no matter who tries to claim it. Subscribe to Telling Story with me for more powerful, real-life, inspired stories of courage, justice, and the quiet strength it takes to rebuild. New stories drop every week. Don't miss the next one.